Hello and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. So I wanted to follow up on a video that I did a few weeks ago about assuming that you're going to become a piano master instead of just, the default assumption that you're going to be okay at piano, you'll learn a few things, but I wanted to extend that video into this one. And I wanted to talk about habits that you can incorporate to make your piano practicing successful. So in this video, I wanted to talk about how would someone who is going to be a piano master actually practice? What kind of, and not even just at the piano, how would they live their lives? How would they immerse themselves in music? And I came up with a list of 12 different things that I want to share with you today. So let's get started. I was contemplating this a lot after recording the previous video, and I came up with my own personal list of 12 things that I could do pretty much right now to change the way I approach practice, both in my mind and in my reality. Your list might look very different than mine, and that's totally fine. I'm just sharing my brainstorming to give you some ideas and to maybe get the ball rolling in your head. So in no particular order, here's what I came up with. I want to pick a practice time and stick to it. I want to log my daily progress, commit to approximately 5 hours a week of practice, listen to a weekly podcast or radio program that's in the genre of classical music and or piano music. I want to draft some sample schedules just so I can visualize how practice is going to fit into my daily life. And I want to draft a sample practice routine for when I actually do sit down to practice. I want to make a list of pieces I could easily relearn for repertoire building, post some of my practicing on social media or YouTube just for accountability, put together several pieces for my own little personal Christmas recital, just like a little thing for family and friends, read books and blogs about piano and practice, subscribe to a classical music magazine, and go to at least one live piano and or symphony performance in the next 3 months. So we're going to talk about these points a little bit more in depth now. So number one is pick a practice time and stick to it, which is a pretty self-explanatory place to start. But I want to add that I'm a little bit of a schedule rebel, as in if I schedule my day to like the last minute, I tend to want to just like completely throw away the schedule and be like, I'm not going to practice piano at 7:30 in the morning. Take that, self. It's kind of silly, but either way, because of that, I don't make really specific schedules. What I'll do is I'll schedule like a general time area. So morning or afternoon or evening. And I find that morning generally works best for me. And then if I end up having extra time in the afternoon or the evening, then I'll practice extra then. But for me, picking a schedule time and sticking to it means setting aside some amount of time, usually about half an hour in the morning, regardless of what time in the morning it is. For you, it might be more specific. You might not rebel against your own self-imposed schedules. Interestingly, if I practice in the morning, I'm actually more inclined to practice later in the day too. You'd think it'd be the opposite. You'd think you'd miss the morning session. You're like, okay, I gotta like get into some practice this afternoon or this evening, but it kind of like creates this downward spiral where you lose your motivation by not doing it's like exercise too. If you miss a day of exercise, it makes it more likely you're going to miss the next day and so on. But if I have that early morning practice session or mid-morning or whatever, then I'm much more likely to practice even more in the day. Next is log daily practice. That's what I created this practice journal for about a month ago. You can find it available on CreateSpace and Amazon. I'll leave it linked in the blog post. But the idea with logging your practice is I find that it really focuses your mind on it kind of makes it less likely that you're gonna just sit down and have a random practice session doing random things. It forces you to think more critically about what exactly you're doing, so you might have a more productive session. It's also really fun to have a record of how much you've practiced and how hard you've worked and the things you've accomplished over some amount of span of time. So I find it really valuable to log your practice. The next point is to commit to approximately 5 hours a week. And this number is going to be different for everyone. You might not want to commit to 5 hours. You might want to commit to more or less, but that's kind of my general number. Now, the reason I say 5 hours a week instead of say 1 hour a day is because I find that I have natural ebbs and flows of not only motivation, but also brain capacity. Like there are some days when I can practice for 2-3 hours and feel totally energized by it. And then there are times where I practice for half an hour and I just feel like I've completely hit my maximum and I've taxed myself. So I do try to be like fairly consistent with a little bit of morning practice, but 5 hours in total works better for me than like 1 hour regimented a day. Listen to a weekly podcast or radio program dedicated to piano music or classical music or something of that ilk. Now, this one goes under the umbrella of immersion. The more you immerse yourself in something, the more you're going to be able to keep up your inspiration and motivation levels. It just kind of gives you this constant source of juice. It gives like a positive feedback loop. So, for example, if you're learning a language, you'll be much more successful learning a new language if you are actually in the culture the language is spoken and you're speaking with natives of the language, as opposed to just kind of like learning by yourself quietly in the corner. And on the subject of radio programs and podcasts, if you guys have any music podcasts that you really like and listen to, I'm always looking for recommendations because I'm a podcast fan. So leave those in the comments if you want to share them. So the next one is draft several sample schedules of how practice is going to fit into your daily life. And if you have a busy schedule, I find this can be really, really helpful to actually like write out a rough schedule so you can visualize where piano practice is going to fit the best. I think it's also a good idea to draft several different versions because most of us have, say, for example, really different schedules on weekends compared to weekdays. So a rough schedule of a regular teaching workday for me would be to do some work, some online and video work in the morning. Usually I do lunch and supper prep in the late morning just because I don't have time to cook supper when I'm teaching, so I like doing it earlier in the day. And then in the afternoon, that's usually dedicated to errands, exercise, preparing for lessons, that kind of thing. And then in the evening when I'm done teaching, I usually dedicate my evening to spending time with Michael, just kind of unwinding and chilling out. So in drafting the schedule, I noticed a couple possible openings that regular piano practice could fit into. Oftentimes my online video work takes less than 3 hours. So I don't always have to do like lots of food prep, lots of supper prep. So that would make any time between basically like 10 and noon fairly available for regular practice, just depending on the day. There's also time before 8 a.m. if I'm super motivated. So anyway, from this I can clearly see that if I'm looking for like a stable, secure spot for daily practice, it's the morning. Any other time throughout the day would just be like a happy bonus. And my weekend schedule, like most people, it's super variable, but mornings still tend to be the most stable time to fit in a practice session. So then it's time to draft a sample practice routine. I've personally found that I can fairly easily fit 30 minutes of practice into my morning and then more blocks, 30-minute blocks throughout my day whenever possible. So what do I actually practice then in that 30-minute time frame? Again, I tend to rebel against really detailed schedules, and so this changes from day to day. But if I'm in the beginning phases of learning a new piece, I might dedicate the full half an hour to only that. If I'm, say, struggling to keep focused at the end of that 30 minutes, I might spend the last few minutes working on a repertoire piece, like something I already know how to play. I don't usually do sight reading, ear training, and technique every single day, but I try to keep track of when I do them so that I at least get to them a couple times a week. And if I'm in a phase where I'm developing a piece or perfecting a piece, then my practice time gets divided a little bit differently. I tend to do a wider variety of things in one session. So maybe I'll start with some warm-ups, do a little sight reading, and then work on the piece. Or maybe I'll play a repertoire piece, work on my main piece, and then when I'm finished, jump on the computer for a few minutes of ear training. Next is to make a list of pieces that I could easily play at a moment's notice, ideally off by heart or from memory. We spend all of this time and effort to learn music, and then we just kind of like throw it away when we learn new stuff. And it's kind of sad to be discarding all of that music, especially the pieces you really love, because then you're in a situation where you're at your grandma's house and she asks you to play something you've learned, and you realize that you can't actually do that because you've just continually been learning new material and you haven't been holding on to anything old. Now, that being said, I do believe that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I think that once we finish learning a piece, it's a good thing to put it away for a while, because then you can reapproach it later and it's going to be fresh again. It's going to be way easier, and it's going to be more rewarding to play oftentimes than the first time around. So that's that's why I think that it's a good idea to build a repertoire list of things you've already learned, kind of want to revisit and relearn, so that you can kind of just have a repertoire on hand for a moment's notice when someone asks you to play piano. Post some of my practice onto various social media outlets like Twitter or YouTube or Facebook or Instagram or anything like that. This falls under the umbrella of accountability. And accountability means more to some people, less to other people. But for those of you who are really motivated by being accountable, this is a great way to share little bits of your practice with friends, because piano practice is so solitary. In general, it's just like us sitting by ourselves at the piano all the time, and we seldom, share that music with other people. So it can be really rewarding personally, but for your friends too, to share music with them via social media, even if it's just like a 20-second clip of something that you've been working on. It's kind of a nice thing to share, and it is very motivating. This is something I've done in the past, not very often, but maybe something I'll start doing a little bit more in the future. This next one is based on accountability as well, and it's very specific. You don't have to have something this specific, but it's to put on a small piano recital of just like me playing several songs for family and friends. Performing is inherently motivating, and it's something, when I was really thinking about it, I performed a lot as a child and I was pretty good at it. I won competitions and stuff like that. But as an adult, we don't really have the same performance opportunities that we have as a kid. As a kid, there's lots of recitals and competitions, but as an adult, it can be kind of stressful to attend a recital and perform at a recital that's also featuring a bunch of children. So, and I find a lot of my adult students kind of have hesitation about performing in that type of venue. But performances don't need to be really formal. Like, it doesn't need to be get up on stage in front of a bunch of people. A performance can simply be you sharing a few songs at your family's house over the holidays or something like that. Maybe you can make it more interesting by explaining a little bit about each piece before you play it. But in general, like, supportive and kind friends and family members would be more than happy to hear such a performance, and it's not that hard to throw together, and it still totally counts, and it's still totally motivating. This is something I've noticed with playing in bands. I've been playing in bands my entire adult life, and I've noticed that when we have a regular schedule of performances, we tend to practice more, we play more, we write more, because the performances themselves are very motivating. But when there are periods of time where we're not performing at all, those are the periods of time where we pretty much stop practicing almost entirely. It's like having that regular performance opportunity is like in and of itself enough of a motivator to continue practice. Read books and blogs about piano and practice. Now this again falls under the category of immersion, because the more you're exposing yourself to a certain worldview, a certain type of person, a certain group or community, the more a part of that community you're going to feel, and the more inspired and motivated on a daily basis you're going to feel. And I notice this when I do a lot of reading, and I tend to go through really specific phases in my reading. So if I'm going through a phase of, I don't know, I'm really into like personal development books, I'll read like a whole bunch of them all in a row. And it'll really affect my worldview for the time that I'm reading those books. Like, I'll start becoming hyper aware of issues like discipline and self-motivation and goal setting and things like that. And I'll start living my life through that lens. Whereas if I'm going through like a health book phase, then I'm going to be living my life through like a healthy eating phase. And you can kind of create that by getting into some of the literature on music, whether that be history, practice tips, anything like that, even blogs, because it'll make you view life through the lens of someone who is really serious about music. This next point is an extension of the last one, but it's a little bit different. So subscribe to a music magazine. It could be digital, it could be like actual hard copy. One that I've subscribed to in the past is Clavier Companion. I know that BBC has a really good classical music magazine, so I'm gonna have to check them out. And I haven't had a subscription to anything like that for about a year, and I want to really get back on that bandwagon, because it's again about that constant immersion and exposure. If you're getting this monthly or bi-monthly, is it bi-monthly when it's twice? Where every 2 months, or is that twice? I don't remember the language. But anyway, you're just getting that like continuous input, continuous inspiration, fresh ideas from other people, and just motivates you at the piano bench. This next point is going to be really specific to me as well. Again, feel free to edit this list for your own purposes. But go to at least one big live event in the next 3 months, live music event. So that could be like a major concert, a piano performance, a symphony performance, that kind of thing. Live music is so fun. It's so fun to go out to a performance, and it's so inspiring. After a performance, I'm just buzzing with inspiration and motivation, and just kind of like lifts you up. And the most ridiculous part about all of this is that despite it being so fun and so motivating, is I don't prioritize it the way that I should, because I could create a laundry list of excuses why I don't go to music more often. I don't live in a big city, so it's harder to make plans and arrangements to get to concerts. I don't have a lot of time. I generally have busy weekends, stuff like that. But those are just crappy excuses. Live music is really important to me. It always has been, and it's worth prioritizing. So this is the last point on my list, but it's also one of the most important ones on my list. So I will definitely be doing. I actually have a performance at the end of October, kind of like a Beethoven symphony Halloween themed thing that I want to hopefully go check out. So we'll do that. And getting out to more than one show would be great, but I want to make like kind of a minimum goal of at least one. Like, let's start with at least one performance. And that is all for today's list. I hope that you found some motivation in this list, maybe a new idea or two that you could put into action. And almost none of these had to do with actually practicing piano. A lot of them had to do with activities outside of the bench, but I really do believe that things like immersion and accountability are entirely crucial beyond just sitting down and practicing piano every day. So I wanted to talk about that more in full. Anyway, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate when you do that, and you can leave comments, criticisms, suggestions, that kind of thing. And I will see you in the next video. It looks like the flowers are on my head. Just an observation.